Hey kids, this is Ivan. I'd like to talk to you a little bit about critical hits and critical fumbles in old school D&D. Now when I started playing D&D back in 1981, there were no real rules for critical hits or critical fumbles in the core books of like say Moldvay Basic or First Edition, AD&D. But sooner or later we got exposed to the idea of critical hits and critical fumbles. And it was probably Dragon Magazine, it might have been a third-party publisher, but I recall that all of us teenage boys would sit around and look at these things and think, wow, that's really neat. You cut this guy's eye out, or you cut his ear off, and he has -3 to charisma for the rest of his life. Or, oh, look at that. If you roll 17, Jimmy gets his hand cut off. Oh, wow. That's kind of neat. But then we realized really fast that if you were to use that in real play, in about 5 to 10 adventures, the party would just be maimed beyond all recognition. They were really maiming tables at that point. The other problem with those, either critical hits or critical fumbles, is as far as I can remember, they weren't using the idea of a confirmation roll. So that meant like every natural 20 was a critical hit, every natural 1 was a critical fumble. That could easily mean that like 10% of all rolls by everybody at the table ends up either in you cutting somebody's foot off or you cutting your own foot off. So they're kind of unusable in that manner. Now looking forward to things like D20 and Pathfinder, the idea that you make a confirmation roll, so you get a threat to a critical, you roll a natural 20, you've got to roll again to hit the armor class. That just means that 5% of all hits become critical hits. That's much more manageable. And the idea of you doing double damage at that point is kind of neat. It's a little extra kicker, and the idea that every once in a while you might really hit somebody really well. Now, in things like Pathfinder and D20, they also have the idea that certain weapons are threat to a critical on like not only a natural roll of a 20, but maybe like a 19 to a 20 or an 18 to a 20. That's kind of interesting, and I understand. You look at the weapons, you can see why certain weapons would do that. I'm thinking more like in old school, it might be neat to have certain classes do that. Maybe after a certain number of levels, a thief or an assassin would be able to have a threat to a critical on a 19 or a 20 or an 18 or a 20, or as an assassin, maybe even a 17 to a 20. They're not going to make a lot of hits because they're kind of like one-shot wonders that go in, they make the hit, they get the heck out of the way because they don't have armor. But that's kind of neat. Same thing for high-level fighters. They might start to be able to threat to a critical on a 19 or 20, 10% of the time. That's kind of an interesting idea to import into an old school game. The other thing I was looking at with critical hits in general is, in games like D20 and Pathfinder, they have critical feats. So every once in a while, you can take this feat where you stun somebody when you score a critical hit. Now, I don't want to do something with feats in like an old school game, but the idea that I can do a third roll, and I know it's a lot of rolls, but it can be kind of fun because, when there's a threat to a critical, everybody kind of looks. And our Pathfinder DM, when I play in that game, we never roll critical hits. He does all the time. And so we all sit there and he rolls that die and we're all looking, oh wow. So the idea of doing a third roll is kind of, doesn't bug me that much because it should be kind of an event. And say, I came with some tables, so maybe you roll a 15 on this third roll and you stun somebody so they take a -1 to initiative and to hit, and their armor class gets 1 worse. And if you roll a 16, it's -2, and if you roll 17, it's -3. Maybe if you roll 18, it's like -4, and the guy drops everything. Maybe if you roll 19, the guy like falls unconscious. So that's kind of a neat idea too. And then what you can do with that, if you really want to have some more fun, is just say add your attack bonus to that. Your 20 minus your THAC0. So the more the better you are at combat, the better you are at like stunning or knocking somebody out when you finally score a critical hit. And then fourth roll, but still kind of fun, is let the guy, the defender, roll a saving throw, maybe versus paralysis, and add his Constitution modifier. Maybe if he makes that saving throw, maybe he doesn't get stunned at all, or maybe he gets to subtract 3 or 4 from your roll on that third roll. So these are kind of some neat things you can do with critical hits. I understand it's a lot of rolls, but once again, it's kind of an event. As far as critical fumbles go, I'm still kind of toying with some of those things. I don't like the ones that cause a lot of damage, like you're going to hit yourself or you're going to hit one of your friends. I understand it's kind of realistic, but not as much fun. But the idea of throwing your sword across the room is kind of funny, dropping your weapon, that sort of thing. I don't think they should happen on 5% of all misses. I think that's way too high. Maybe 1%, maybe, 0.5%. So maybe if you roll a natural 1 on a D20, you roll again. If you roll another 1, maybe it's a critical fumble. Something that just happens every once in a while, but just enough for some chuckles every few games. So that's what I'm doing with those so far. Maybe you'll get some ideas and throw some ideas my way.